Today's history video will be what Washington and Hamilton could teach Sarkozy and Merkel. If we could somehow bring them back, what lesson would they be able to teach the leaders of today's Europe? These, on Saturdays we do history videos, and I hope you enjoy it. Right now, the European leadership is struggling with coming up with a method of guaranteeing the bonds of Greece, and by implication, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and perhaps Ireland. And what they're talking about is how large a bailout fund do we need? And however large the fund is, it's going to have to be more. And you know that 6 months from now, they'll be coming back needing to put even more money into it. Because as long as it's a limited fund, the question always will occur to investors of what happens when the money runs out. Will there be more money forthcoming or not? And speculators will always challenge that system, always press the envelope to the edge to see what will happen. Will mommy come up with more money? Will daddy come up with more of an allowance or not? And that's always going to be the case. But what the Europeans have done is they have explicitly refused to do the one thing that would solve this problem completely, which is for the rest of Europe to say Greece's bonds are our bonds. Italy's debt is our debt. Spain's and Portugal's debt is the same as British or French debt. We're going to treat them all equally. And at that point, the speculators would go home because they know there's no point in making a run on Germany or on England, and really not on France, and everything would stabilize. But they won't do it because the population of Germany and the voters in Germany and in France will not permit their government to commit their tax revenue to bailing out the bonds of Southern European nations. Well, that's exactly the situation that the Founding Fathers faced in the early days of after the Constitution was adopted, in the first couple of weeks, literally, of the Washington administration. Because each of the 13 colonies had contracted debts in the course of fighting the Revolutionary War. And some, like Virginia, were like Germany. They had paid their debts. They had no debt. Others, like New York and Massachusetts, had significant debts and were looking for the newly created federal government to assume those debts and repay them. And Jefferson and the Monroe and a lot of the Virginians said, no, we're not going to do that. Why should we, a state that paid our debts, bail out these other states that haven't? Let them deal with it on their own. And Hamilton, who was a New Yorker, but Washington, who was a Virginian, said, no way. This is one country, we're one United States, and we are going to assume the debts of every single one of these states. Any debt contracted by somebody in New York will be repaid by somebody in Virginia equally, regardless of where they come from. And the Republicans, they were told at the time, led by Jefferson, opposed this like crazy. But Hamilton supported it and pushed it. And you know how he got Jefferson's approval for it? He told Jefferson, I'm going to put the U.S. Capitol in the South. I'm going to put it in Washington, D.C., a newly created city carved out of Virginia and Maryland. And in return for putting the capital down there, as opposed to New York or Philadelphia, where it had been, I want you to assume the debts of these states. And Jefferson basically said, well, we'll be very north-oriented if we assume these debts, but if the capital is down there, we're more south-oriented. And remember, transportation was very limited in that era. Well, that is precisely what Merkel and Sarkozy are not willing to do. They are not willing to say we're one country, we're one continent, we're one peoples, and the debts incurred by one of us will be repaid by all of us. And until they're willing to say that, the European experiment will fail. Because it was because Washington and Hamilton were willing to say it that the American experiment succeeded. Now, on a more light note, if you like history, and your dog likes history, my wife and I wrote a book called Dubs Goes to Washington with Clayton Leota, who did the illustrations. And we were just concerned that there really weren't a lot of books for children out there that really explained history and our heritage and our heroes and what made America such an exceptional, extraordinary nation. So we sent our golden retriever on a fictional trip to Washington, and he keeps losing his tennis ball and looking for it all over the place. And as he looks at it in different places, we tell people the history of the place and how important it is. So, for example, At the memorial for the Second World War, Dubs was thrilled by what he saw. Dubs is the name of our dog. The monuments to the men who kept us free. But there was still no ball that he could see. So he had to continue to go looking all over the place. And I hope you like this. It's a really entertaining, witty way to teach your kids history and your grandkids and all of that. You can go to dickmorris.com and get it. It's not in bookstores. And it's called Dubs Goes to Washington. Thanks. Hope you enjoy it.